I've been working as a private investigator for the past 3 or so years. I chose this profession because I found myself bored with life and hoped that this career would give me a few thrills. It isn't exactly the Sherlock Holmes type work I was hoping for, but it does keep me busy. Yesterday was the most thrilling day in my career by far. It all started 2 days ago when a woman who looked to be in her late 30s walked into the office. For privacy's sake, I'll refer to her as Maria. I had a sit down with Maria and took notes on the case. My husband has been disappearing a lot. He leaves work at 8 and doesn't come home until almost midnight. How long has this been going on? I asked her. About 3 months. He always told me that he had to work overtime because his company has been working on this huge project. Last week was our anniversary, so I got off work early and set up a candlelit dinner. He wasn't home by 6, so I decided to call his boss. I asked him if he could send my husband home so that we may have dinner together, and his boss informed me that he had already left. I hung up the phone and eagerly awaited his arrival. I sat down and waited for hours and hours, staring at the clock. My husband got home at 11:47 p.m. I asked him what took him so long, and he told me I had to stay for overtime. I begged them to let me leave, but they wouldn't let me. I threw out the dinner and went to sleep. I called his boss the next day to see if they made a mistake, but he assured me that my husband left work at 5 o'clock, sharp. You don't think he could be committing adultery, do you? I don't know, but he is definitely keeping secrets from you. Just say the word, and I'll start tailing him tonight. That would be great, she told me. I promised her that I would email her if I discovered anything. She gave me his name and place of work. I will be referring to her husband as Michael. I got to his place of work at around 4 and parked in the driveway. I saw someone matching his picture leave the building at 5:07 and get into a car. I followed Michael and took several pictures. He went to a diner right after work and sat down. I walked in and sat in the corner and ordered food so that I wouldn't look too inconspicuous. I saw Michael speaking with a woman. I discreetly took pictures just in case, but that was not enough to prove adultery. He left the diner alone at around 7. I followed him until he turned into a small road that led into the woods. I knew that if I followed him in a car, he would notice me, so I parked my car at a nearby gas station and followed him on foot. It took a while to catch up because I was on foot, but at around 8:30, I saw his car parked outside of a remote house. I saw him step out of the house at around 10:30 and get back into his car. I knew that I couldn't keep tailing him since it was a long walk back to my car, so I went to the cabin. I walked up to the door and peeked inside and saw nothing out of the ordinary. I picked the lock on the front door and opened it. I knew there couldn't be an alarm system because that would increase the risk of his wife finding out about his little home away from home. I knew that I was breaking the law at this point, but playing fair never gets anyone far in life. I held my flashlight and searched the house. There was no light switch or ceiling fan. In fact, the house didn't even have any wall outlets or electricity-powered devices. There was no running water either. The only noteworthy things were an empty medicine cabinet, an empty wardrobe, 2 battery-powered fans, 2 battery-powered lamps, a sofa, 2 chairs, and a table. I took a few pictures and went home. I didn't want to call his wife until I was certain that he was loyal or until I found some hard evidence. I decided that I would continue my investigation the following day. I followed him again and saw him sitting down with the same girl from the day before. I didn't take any pictures this time, I just watched. When he left the bar and got into his car, the woman accompanied him. He was driving and he followed the same road that he followed the night before. I parked in the same lot and followed after them on foot. When I saw Michael's car parked outside of the same house, I approached the house. I put my ear to the door. I heard loud moaning. I looked through a window and saw that no one was in sight. I did, however, notice that the wardrobe I saw that previous day had been opened and there was a hidden door behind it. I picked the lock on the front door and quietly opened it. I looked inside the wardrobe and saw that there was a staircase leading down into a basement. I started recording and quietly crept over to the top of the staircase. I saw the woman, naked, bent over on a bed, and Michael, also naked, on his knees behind her. I pointed my camera at them and started to record them. I immediately noticed something peculiar, that the entire room, including the bed, was covered in plastic. I would have been more suspicious if I wasn't so focused on getting a good video. After a few seconds passed, I was about to turn off my camera and head home with my evidence until I saw Michael pull a carving knife from under the pillow in front of her. When I saw the knife, I was about to call out and stop him, but in less than a minute, Michael had rammed the knife into the woman's eye. Her screams were ear-shattering. It sounded like something straight out of Psycho. I knew I couldn't save the girl, so I kept recording. Michael held his left hand over her mouth to quiet her screams. He then got the knife and stabbed it into her neck. She tried to put her hand over the puncture to stop the bleeding, but Michael dropped the knife and held both of her arms. I noticed that she was trying to scream, but it was much more quiet and gargled than before. Blood shot out of her neck and painted the plastic crimson. At this point, I backed away and left the house, closing the door as quietly as possible. When I felt that I was at a safe distance from the house, I ran as fast as I could to my car. I got in and sped home. I arrived home at about 9:30 and kept replaying that video. I kept studying every detail, wondering what I could possibly tell his wife. The first thing I thought of doing was presenting my evidence to the police, but that seemed so boring. I spent a great portion of my life seeking thrill, and I may have finally found my chance. Maybe that is just the sleep deprivation talking, but I don't know. I'm having trouble sleeping, but I'm going to keep trying. Update. Before I go into the details of what happened yesterday, I would like to clear something up. I do own a gun, a black Taurus PT-92, which I usually keep on the inside pocket of my jacket. I did not have my gun with me when I went into the secret house because I didn't think that Michael would be dangerous, and if I was found, I didn't want to be armed. I would have most likely shot Michael and tried to save the girl. Now, for the story. I slept for a few hours following my original post, but I couldn't stop thinking about Maria. That poor girl is obviously sleeping next to this sick monster. I decided that I needed to investigate the secret room. I went to his workplace at around 11 a.m. and checked to see if his car was there. I saw his car and checked to make sure that it was the same license plate, which it was. I decided that this meant that it was safe to go check out the house. I drove out there and arrived a little bit before midday. I took a peek through the window and noticed nothing out of the ordinary, so I picked the lock and stepped inside. I opened the wardrobe and slid the back across. I pulled out my handgun and flashlight and began to investigate. The first thing I noticed was that all the plastic had been taken down. I searched under the pillow expecting to find a knife, but I didn't find anything. In fact, the entire room looked spotless. The only things I found in the room was the bed and a nightstand next to the bed with a lamp on it. I checked inside the drawers of the nightstand and all I found was a roll of paper towels in the top drawer. Once I thoroughly investigated the hidden room, I walked up the stairs and started to investigate the house one more time. I made sure to leave everything the same way that I found it and leave no trace that anyone had been there. After I finished my investigation, I decided that there was no way I could keep this from his wife. Every moment she stayed with him, she was in danger. I got back in my car and drove to the nearby gas station I had left my car at the previous 2 days. It was about 2 o'clock by this time, so I knew that Maria was still at work. I pulled out my phone and sent her an email. Hey Maria, I made some great progress on that project we were working on. I have something that you definitely need to see. Please stop by my office right after work if you're able to. I wanted to be as vague as possible, just in case she happened to read it around anyone. I headed back to the office with all my evidence and notes. I had not decided if I was going to show her the part where he murdered that woman, but I was leaning towards the idea. As reluctant I was to get the police involved, I didn't want to end up endangering her any more than I already had. Just to be safe, I downloaded the video to my laptop, cut out the part that included the homicide, and saved the cut video to my laptop. I waited for her around 6. That's when I decided to call her. No answer. I went over to her place of work and didn't see her car in the parking lot. After calling her one more time and receiving no answer, I decided to drive over to the home address she gave me. I drove up to her house and saw 2 cars, hers and Michael's. It was about 7:30 at this time, so I decided to ring the doorbell. I rang it and waited for a minute or so, and Michael opened the door. I was shivering. "We aren't interested," Michael said. I was contemplating shooting him right there, but he held his left hand behind him. This meant that he was either holding a gun or pretending to. I didn't want to take any chances. "I'm a coworker of Maria's. I urgently need to speak with her." "Whatever it is, I'm sure that it can wait until tomorrow morning." "It's very important that I speak to her right now." "Did you try calling her?" "I did." "And if she didn't answer, she probably doesn't want to speak to you right now. Ask her about it in person tomorrow, but right now, go home." He slammed the door in my face. I immediately began to worry for Maria's well-being. My first idea was to call the police, posing as Michael, complaining about harassment, but I quickly found flaws with that plan. The most important one being that, knowing what Michael is capable of, Maria might be dead before the police show up. I hopped the fence into their backyard. All I had on me was my pistol and my flashlight. I saw a pipe on the outside leading up to their bedroom window. I put my gun in my jacket pocket and held the flashlight with my teeth. I climbed the pipe, and when I reached the window, I held the flashlight and shined it through the window. I saw Maria, lying, motionless. I looked closer and saw blood near her mouth. I dropped the flashlight and pulled out my gun. I shot the lock that held the window shut and slid it open. I ran to the light switch and turned it on. Then I went over to Maria. After noticing blood near her ankle and some further inspection, I came to the realization that she was still alive and conscious. The only thing I noticed wrong with her, save for a few bruises, was a laceration on her Achilles tendon. At this point, it was obvious that he did not mean to kill Maria. He could have done that easily. He just wanted to occupy me while he made his escape. I took off my jacket and wrapped it around Maria's ankle to stop any bleeding. I held Maria's hand and told her to stay with me while I phoned the police.
911, what's your emergency?
"I need you to send police and paramedics here."
Of course. What's the problem?
"I'm with a woman who has been attacked by her husband. She's bleeding."
Is she conscious?
"Yes, she is."
May I please speak to her?
"Can you speak with the operator, Maria?" I asked. Maria opened her mouth. I thought that she was trying to say something, but she wanted to show me something. I took a look in her mouth to notice that it was bleeding and lacking a tongue. Oh, Christ! Maria pointed over to a nightstand. I looked and saw her severed tongue and a post-it note next to it. I hung up the phone, certain that the police and paramedics were well on their way, and walked over to the post-it note. "Your move" was written in pencil. I was thinking fast and decided to get rid of the note to prevent the police from reading it. I tore the note in half, then I tore those halves into halves. I then put the pieces in my mouth and after a few moments swallowed them. I returned to Maria and kept talking to her to make sure that she didn't lose consciousness. The police came and brought me in for questioning and took Maria to the hospital. I told the police the truth, but not the whole truth. I explained that I am a private investigator and that she hired me to see if her husband was cheating on her. I told them that I discovered that he was and sent her an email explaining that we needed to meet. When she didn't come to my office, I went over to her house to meet with her. He opened the door and wouldn't let me speak with her. I feared for her safety, so I broke in and found her that way. I neglected to tell them about the secret house and about the girl he killed. They let me go, but without my gun or my coat. They dropped me back at the house where they were conducting their investigation so that I could get my car. I drove over to the office where I could grab a spare flashlight. I asked a colleague of mine if he had an extra gun I could borrow for a few days. He told me that I could borrow his handgun, Beretta 8000, as long as I returned it by the 8th. I thanked him and headed to a hotel so that I could spend the night. I couldn't make the mistake of underestimating him. I needed to play this thing safe. The only thing that I know right now is that I lost the biggest advantage that I had, which was his failure to know that I was investigating him. Tomorrow, I plan to head over to the hospital and check up on his wife. I have a head start on the police, meaning that if I work fast, I can catch him before they do. It's my move. Let the games begin. Update. I woke up a little earlier than usual yesterday. I kept re-watching the video in which Michael murdered that poor lass. If Maria could identify her, I might get a lead. I looked over the pictures I took the first day that I started following him and saved one with the girl's face onto my phone. The first thing I did was investigate the house in which Michael committed the murder. There's a slim chance of him being held up in there. I drove out to the house and noticed no cars. I picked the lock anyways and searched the house top to bottom. I found no traces of Michael or any clues that would help me. I decided that I needed to head over to the hospital and question Maria. The murdered girl seemed to be the only lead I had. When I got there, I asked to visit her, and when I got to her room, I saw her sitting up in a bed with a notepad and pen on the table beside her bed. I asked the nurse if we could have some alone time. "Is it okay with you?" the nurse asked Maria. Maria grabbed her pen and notepad and wrote, "Yes." The nurse walked out of the room, leaving us alone. "I sent you an email to meet me after work. Why didn't you show?" "I didn't see an email from you," she wrote down. "Does your husband have access to your email account?" She responded with, "I left my desktop logged into my email. He must have got it in that way." "He was cheating on you, by the way. I followed him and discovered him having sex with some woman." I pulled out the picture of the woman on my phone. "Have you ever seen this woman before?" She held my phone in her hands and examined the picture for about a minute. I was beginning to lose hope that she would recognize her at all, but she handed me the phone and picked up her notepad. "Several months ago, Michael forgot the lunch that I packed for him at home. I saw her in a cubicle. She must be one of her coworkers," she wrote. I didn't get a name, but it was a start. I knew that following this lead was the best shot I had at catching Michael. I thanked her and stood up, prepared to leave. Before I could turn and walk away, she grabbed my sleeve. I looked over to her, and she began to write, "Find Michael and bring him to justice. You will be paid." I nodded and left. I went over to Michael's place of work to question his employer. I asked to make an appointment with the manager, and a receptionist told me that he was available to speak with me. I was shown into a nice office in which I was able to speak with the manager. I'll be referring to the manager as Joseph. We greeted one another, and then I showed him the picture of the woman. "I'm a private investigator, and I was hired to find a missing person. This woman works here, correct?" Joseph looked a little uneasy. I understand that this question may have shocked him a little. He then replied, "Yes, she's employed here. I'm guessing that she hasn't been showing up to work these past few days, correct?" "Correct," he answered quickly. "Can you please tell me her name?" "The person who employed your services didn't tell you?" he pressed. "They don't know her name. She isn't the person that I was employed to find, but I think that she could lead me to find the person." "This sounds too odd for me. I'm afraid that you will need to go elsewhere for your information," Joseph told me. I pulled out a $50 bill from my pocket and placed it in front of me. "President Grant would like to know her name." He looked at the bill for a few seconds, then he told me her name. "I will be referring to this woman as Claris." He reached for the $50 bill, but I placed my hand over it. "What type of car does she drive, and what is the license plate number?" I asked. "I don't know," he answered. Look through your files. Figure it out. He turned to his desktop and began pulling up some files. After a few minutes, he told me the car and the plate. I figured that she would have left the car at the diner the night she was killed, but it was probably towed by now. I decided to check the diner first, just in case. After finding no cars that matched this description, I checked online to see if any towing lots were storing any cars matching the description and license plate that I was given. Luckily, I found a lot a little over a mile away that had Claris's car. I planned on searching the car for clues. I stopped by a sporting store and purchased a ski mask, then drove over to the lot and waited about an hour so that the sun was down and I could sneak in. During this hour, I was scouting the lot looking for an entry point, an exit point, and, of course, the car itself. I located all of these, put on the mask, and prepared to sneak in. I doubted that they would let me search the car without being the owner, even if I proved myself to be a private investigator. I located all three things and snuck in, quickly and quietly. I approached the car and crouched beside the passenger door. I unlocked the door using the slipknot method. For anyone who doesn't know, the slipknot method involves tying a loose knot in the middle of a long piece of string. The knot is slid between the car door and the door frame, placing around the lock and tightened. Once tightened, the string is to be brought up, rendering the car door unlocked. You can learn more about this method with a simple Google search. After I unlocked the door, I closed it and began looking for clues. Once I opened the glove compartment, I found a powered-off iPhone 6. I powered on the phone and saw a picture of Claris as the lock screen. At first, I was confused as to why the phone was still in her car, but then it all began to make sense. Michael must have told her to leave it in her car so that no one could locate his little home away from home via GPS. I continued searching her car and found nothing noteworthy. I even popped the hood and the trunk just to make sure that there were no clues being missed. I came to the conclusion that her phone was my only lead. Claris's phone had a passcode, so I couldn't get in. I did, however, have a coworker who was an expert at this sort of thing. I hastily snuck out of the lot and drove over to his house. He's sort of a loner, so I don't worry too much about catching him at a bad time. Michael most likely disposed of Claris's body and is confident that nobody has found it. This meant that the possibility of him hiding in Claris's house was present. Once I arrived at my friend's house, I explained to him that I was on a case and needed his help opening this phone. He invited me inside and started on the phone. He plugged the phone into some sort of device that helped him bypass the security. I'm not going to act like I understand what he was doing, but he managed to get into the phone within 10 minutes. He disabled the passcode security feature, which allowed me to use the phone at my leisure. I thanked him and got back to my car. When I opened Claris's phone, the first thing I noticed was the wallpaper. The wallpaper was a picture of her and a man that I could not recognize. He was hugging her from the back, and they were kissing. I looked a little closer and noticed that they were wearing matching rings. I opened the Maps app and looked through her favorites. Luckily, there was a location named Home. I typed the location into my GPS and drove over. Once I neared the location, I parked around the corner and put on my ski mask. I opened Claris's contacts and saw a contact saved as Home. I saved the number and devised a plan. I walked over to Claris's house and stood across the street. I crouched next to a trash can and looked at the house with binoculars. I saw a car parked out front, but it didn't belong to Michael. The lights were turned on. I noticed that I had a clear view of the landline from the front window. I crossed the street and crouched down a few meters from the window and drew my gun. My plan was to call the landline, and if Michael went anywhere near it, I would shoot him dead. I turned off the safety and aimed near the landline. I pulled out my phone and called the landline. I could see it ringing through the window, but no one went to answer it. I called again, and still nothing. After calling a third time, I decided that I should investigate the house. I knew that someone was in the house, I just didn't know who. I walked up to the window and looked through. I saw a TV left turned on. I knew that if Michael was in the house, I had no time to waste. So I kicked the door right next to the lock with all my force. The door busted open. I held my gun and looked around. The first thing that I noticed was the awful smell. After a little investigating, I discovered the source of the smell. The man from Claris's wallpaper was lying down on the floor, dead. He had his throat slit open, and he looked like he had been dead for several hours. I ran to the back of the house trying to see if Michael had tried to escape through the back door, but it was shut and locked. That's when I felt Claris's phone vibrate. I checked it, and it said, "Michael." I answered. "Where are you?" I asked.
You're smarter than you look. I was surprised that you were able to discover my little secret, but I'm more surprised that you tracked me down.
I haven't told anything about Claris yet. If you turn yourself in, the only charge you're looking at is the assault charge.
Why would you keep my secret? That doesn't make any sense.
You and I are the only people in the world who know about that. Come to the police station, get yourself a lawyer. You still have a life. Don't throw it all away. He chuckled.
I'll take my chances. You're pretty smart. You made a great adversary. The only mistake you made was thinking that you're smarter than me.
With that, he hung up the phone. I heard a car start up out front. I ran to the living room trying to catch him before he escaped, but he was already driving off by the time he came into view. I aimed my gun, hoping to shoot his tires before he turned out of view, but then I smelled something. I smelled gas. I ran out of the house and sprinted full speed to my car. While I was sprinting, I heard an explosion behind me. I hopped into my car and drove over to the hotel I'm staying at. I got into my room and placed my things on my desk. I couldn't help thinking about the conversation we had. I kept replaying it over and over in my mind. I couldn't help thinking about what he said, and I knew that there was some truth to it. There's no doubt that I underestimated him. I didn't expect him to be as patient, crafty, or astute as he turned out to be. Despite all the uncertainties I have, I'm certain that my situation just got much more dire. Underestimating him is not a mistake that I plan on making again. Update. I barely got any sleep following my last update. I had way too much on my mind. As soon as I woke up, I gathered my things and drove out to the house. I felt that Michael was running out of options, and he might be hiding out there. I prayed that he would be there, or at least had been there following our previous encounter. If he'd gone there, even for a few minutes, maybe a clue could lead me to where he's run off to. When I got there, I noticed the car that Michael escaped with parked outside the house. I grinned. I crept over to the house window and saw the plates looked completely normal with no sign of Michael. I picked the lock and crept inside. I looked around for Michael and didn't see him, so I decided to investigate the secret room. I held my gun in my right hand and placed my left hand on the door. I slid the door open and pulled out my flashlight, held up my gun, and looked for any sign of Michael. He wasn't in the house, but I needed to look for clues. If Michael had believed me about not talking to the police about Claris, he would most likely be here. This means that he must think that I lied. I doubted that he would be returning, so my best bet was to turn this place inside out, looking for something that he left behind. No criminal is perfect, and if he thinks that I'm dead, maybe he let his guard down and made a mistake. I decided to check the car first and found nothing noteworthy until I popped the hood. I looked closely, examining the engine to find a phone carefully placed beside it. I pulled it out only to see that it was broken beyond use, but not beyond salvaging the data. I was eager to call up that friend I mentioned in the previous update, but I decided to investigate the house first. I investigated the house more thoroughly than I ever had before. I checked pillowcases, between mattresses, under furniture. I didn't find anything. I decided to take the broken phone over to my friend and see if there was anything he could do. I hopped back into my car and sped over to his house. When I got there, he let me come inside and he began to get to work. He opened up the phone and pulled out the SIM card. He placed the card into another phone and plugged it into the same machine from the previous update. After a short wait, he handed me the phone with the passcode disabled. I thanked him profusely and checked everything I could think of. I noticed several calls being made to the same number. The number was saved under a contact name, but I'll be referring to the contact as Henry. This Henry guy was my only lead, but I don't know how to find him. I looked through Claris's contacts and noticed that he was not a contact on her phone. I looked through the messages that Michael had with Henry, and they all seemed purposely vague. However, one message stood out. It was sent late last night, after the phone call I had with Michael. The message read, "Need shelter, will call." This was most likely sent right before Michael broke his cell phone. I smirked. I knew that finding Henry would lead me to find Michael, but how could I find Henry? I texted Maria and explained that I need to come by. She was staying at a hotel so that Michael would not know her location. Once I got to Maria's hotel room, I sat down with her and showed her the evidence that I had found. I asked her if she knew who Henry was and if she knew where I could find him. She told me that Henry was a friend of Michael's who used to work with him several years ago. She told me the location that he worked at, but warned me that it is unlikely that he's still working there. I thanked her and went to investigate anyway. It isn't like I have much of a choice. I went over to the location that she gave me and asked to speak with the manager. I'll be calling the manager Dave. Dave came to me and asked what he could help me with. "May we talk in private?" I asked. "Regarding what?" "I'm a private investigator and I think you will be able to help me with an investigation that I'm currently conducting." He brought me to an isolated room and asked me what it is that I needed. "I need to track down someone who is or was employed here." I told Dave the Henry's first and last name, as well as the year he used to work here. "I know a lot of people, and I'm not very good with faces, but I won't ever forget Henry." "Does he still work here?" I asked. "He did until a couple months back. He left though, got a job at a building not too far from here," he explained. "Do you remember which building?" "Not off the top of my head, but I can check." After some clicking around on his desktop, he gave me the address of the building that he was working at. He also showed me his picture and told me the car he used to drive. And I pray that he still drove the same car. I headed over to the building and arrived around 4:30. I sat in my car looking for anyone who looked similar to the picture to approach the car. At around 5:25, I spotted him. I carefully tailed him, making sure that he didn't notice me. He entered some suburban neighborhood before parking at a house. I took several pictures and watched from afar with binoculars. I sat in my car for a few minutes trying to decide the best course of action. After a few minutes, I decided that this game has gone on long enough. I told myself that I would kick the door down and shoot Michael in the head. I put on my ski mask, got out of the car, walked up to the front door, and kicked it right in. It flew open, and I walked in with my gun drawn and safety off. I took a few steps in and saw Henry, but not Michael. I pointed my gun at Henry. "Where is he?" I shouted. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said. He sounded horrified. I walked up to him and grabbed him by his throat. "I'm not fucking around," I shouted. "Okay, he came here late last night and crashed. He left in the morning, I swear." "Where did he—" My question was interrupted by a noise. I heard footsteps coming from the front entrance. I grabbed Henry and held my gun to his head. I held him in front of me to block any bullets from hitting me. I knew that it was Michael, and I aimed my gun waiting for him to show himself. When I saw his silhouette, I shot a bullet but all it hit was the wall. The footsteps stopped, and it was dead silent. Then, I heard his voice.
"You're persistent,"
he said coolly. "Show yourself, or Henry dies," I threatened.
"So you can open fire on me?" "I don't care if he dies."
At this point, Henry started panicking. He promised me that Michael left that morning and that he had nothing to do with this. I believed him too. Michael must have scouted this place all day checking if I would come. "Shut up!" I yelled at Henry. I turned my attention to Michael. "I won't shoot if you step out now and drop your gun."
"I was hoping to get the drop on you. I thought it would all end tonight. I'm sure that now the police are coming, and I certainly can't escape before they arrive if I stay any longer. So I must go now."
As soon as he finished that sentence, he leaned his hand over the wall and shot a bullet that hit Henry right in the stomach. Henry started to scream in pain. My initial thought was that the shot was meant for me, but then I realized that he didn't want to leave a loose end hanging around. Henry fell backwards, staggering me. I dropped his body and ran to the window. I looked out to see Michael driving away in a car that I hadn't seen before. I shot my gun at his tires, but he was too far away and moving too fast for me to actually hit him. I knew that he slipped away once more, so I turned my attention to Henry. "Where is he going?" I asked. "Tell me." Henry just looked at me with his eyes wide open. I couldn't tell if he was too shocked to speak or in too much pain, but we both knew that he was going to die. I searched him, but all he had on him was his cell phone and his keys. I knew that there was too much evidence placing me here, so I knew that I couldn't run. I determined that I had less than 10 minutes until the police arrived, so I took off my ski mask and hauled ass to Henry's car. I searched for anything that could possibly be useful. All I found was a notebook, so I ran over to my car. I opened up my car and placed his notebook, keys, and cell phone in my glove compartment, as well as my ski mask. I shut the glove compartment and ran back to the house and waited for the police. While I was waiting, I put my hands over Henry's wounds to stop the bleeding. I wasn't actually trying to save him. I knew that he was beyond saving, but I needed a story to tell the police. When the police arrived, they questioned me at the scene. I told them that Henry had hired me to do a background check on one of his coworkers. I said that I was meeting with him in order to discuss my findings, but Michael showed up, kicked down the front door, and tried to shoot me but missed and hit Henry instead. I shot a bullet back at him but missed, so he took off. I told them that I went to the window to see him speeding off and try to shoot his tires. This story was somewhat believable since Michael was a wanted man, and I was at his house the night that he went on the run. The police asked me why I didn't call them. I told them that I was too occupied trying to stop Henry's bleeding and was confident that a neighbor had heard the gunshots and called them for sure. After some extensive questioning, the police decided that the crime scene seemed to match my story. They let me go but warned me that they would contact me if anything turned up. They did, however, take my gun as evidence again. This wasn't too much of a problem since I was able to get my old gun back since they had concluded that investigation. By the time I was free to go, it was late at night, so I went back to my hotel room. I took my new evidence up to the room and placed it all down on my desk. I was praying that there was a lead buried somewhere in here. I was so angry that I couldn't anticipate that trap, but I was more angry that I let him slip through my fingers again. Despite all of this, I swear, the next time me and Michael meet, it will be the last. I'm either going to kill that prick, or I'm going to die trying. Update. I woke up and I knew that I needed to start my hunt. If Michael was smart, which I know he is, he would be leaving town before the heat with the police gets any hotter. I checked the notebook and cell phone I got from Henry. The cell phone didn't have a SIM card at all, so there was nothing on it that I could use to find Michael. The notebook had a few pages ripped out, so I got a pen and scratched across the page. I could see the previous page read, Michael, black Toyota Camry, and then a license plate number. I saw Michael escaped in a black Toyota Camry, so I knew that this information could be trusted. I thought a lot about Michael shooting Henry. It seems that he's trying to eliminate anyone who could give me unwanted information. I immediately thought about Maria and knew that he might come for her sooner or later. I immediately headed over to Maria's hotel room. She was my last hope for getting the drop on Michael. I knew that if Michael knew where she was, he would try to come and kill her, so I just needed to trick him into getting to her. As soon as I got to her hotel room, I asked if she had seen Michael following her attack. "No," she wrote down. "Have you left the hotel since you checked in?" She circled the word no. I looked around the room to make sure there weren't any bugs. This could very well be my last shot at catching Michael, and it's ruined if he sees it coming. I had an idea. I asked if she had her keys with her. She wrote down that they were at her house. Her car has been parked at her house ever since Michael attacked her. Maybe Michael put a GPS tracker on it before his attack. It seemed like a long shot at first, but it would make sense knowing how crafty he'd been. Maria gave me her house keys and told me the password to her burglar alarm. I drove to Maria's house and opened the door. I knew that there was a close to no chance that Michael had been hiding out here, but I drew my gun anyway and checked every corner. After satisfying my paranoia, I got Maria's keys from the key rack. First, I checked under the car. No tracker. Then, I checked the car's interior. Still, no tracker. When I popped the hood and checked there, I began to smile from ear to ear. Right next to the engine was a tracker. I closed up the hood, took the keys, and drove over to Maria's place. I needed her help if I wanted to bait Michael out into the open. I drove back over to her hotel room and gave her the keys. I explained to her that I needed her help in order to get Michael out into the open. I asked her to drive her car out to the diner where I followed him the first night and eat something. I gave her directions to Michael's secret house and told her to drive there after she finished her food. She seemed frightened, but I promised that nothing would happen to her. I drove her over to her house and gave her the keys. I told her to wait 10 minutes and text me if anything happens. I then drove out to the diner and parked my rental car at a pharmacy across the street and watched with binoculars. Maria got there a little over 10 minutes after I parked, and I was discreetly watching from across the street. About 20 minutes after Maria arrived, I saw Michael's car drive into the diner's parking lot and park. I was scared that Maria would make a mistake and lead on that it was a trap, but I needed to trust her. I parked my rental car at a gas station I had mentioned in previous updates and walked into the woods. I found a nice area so that I could see the house and the path leading up to it. I waited for a little over an hour, just waiting for them to arrive, but then I saw Maria's car driving down the path. At first, I couldn't see Michael's car, but after a short wait, I saw his car about 20 meters away from the house. Maria had turned off the car, stepped out with her crutches, moved over to the door, and started fiddling with the doorknob. Michael's car stopped. He got out and began walking towards the house. I started moving to get closer so I could take a clear shot. When I felt confident, I took the safety off my gun and took my aim. He just kept walking. I held my breath and counted to 3 in my head. 1, 2, 3. I pulled the trigger. Time itself seemed to slow down. After what had been a fraction of a second but had felt like eons, I saw the bullet hit him in the back. He fell to the floor, shouting in pain. I walked over to him. What I saw was him reach into his jacket, but I shot him in the shoulder. I reached into his jacket and grabbed a handgun from a shirt pocket. I took a few steps back and dropped his gun at my feet. We looked at each other silently for a moment. Then he spoke.
I guess you win.
I guess I win.
You gonna kill me or turn me in?
I'm going to kill you.
Well, what are you waiting for? I hope you weren't expecting me to beg.
I wasn't.
Then get on with it,
he said with a straight face. I looked at him for a moment, then said, I guess I am smarter than you. His straight face turned into a scowl. He looked enraged. I aimed my gun and shot him in the forehead. His body dropped to the floor, motionless. I walked over to Maria and told her to go back to her hotel room. She nodded her head and drove off. I went over to Michael's body and just examined him for a moment. I closed his still open eyes and loaded him into the back seat of his car. I then picked up the shell casings that my gun had left. I pulled off Michael's shirt and stuffed the end of it into the gas tank. I pulled out my lighter and lit the other end on fire. I started walking back towards the car I rented and heard the explosion from behind me. I decided to keep my rental car for today and return it tomorrow. So I drove over to the diner that I followed Michael the first day and got some dinner. I couldn't stop thinking about him. I don't think I'll stop anytime soon. I drove back to my hotel room to spend my last night there. I may post another update if something of interest happens, but for now, I won.